They say the loudest sound in war is silence. Not the explosions. Not the screaming. Not even the gunfire. It's the silence that comes after, when everything stops, and you're left standing in the wreckage of what used to be life. That's where my story begins. Not on the battlefield. But in the space after, the empty hallway, the quiet kitchen, the bed that suddenly feels too big. The war outside was over. But the one inside me had just begun. Every morning, I woke up before sunrise, not because I wanted to, but because my mind refused to rest. The walls of my home were too clean, too safe, too quiet. My heart didn't know how to exist without the rhythm of chaos. I'd close my eyes, and I'd hear them, boots against gravel, shouts through static, the sound of my brother's laughter echoing through desert wind. And then, silence again. The kind that presses against your chest until you can't breathe. I thought peace would feel like freedom. But peace felt like guilt. I was supposed to be happy that I made it home. But every meal, every smile, every ordinary moment felt like something I didn't deserve. Because for every sunrise I saw, there were faces I couldn't see anymore. That's when I realized something no one tells you about war. It doesn't end when you come home. It just changes its form. Now it hides in your reflection. In the moments between breaths. In the sound of your daughter's laughter when it's too pure, too innocent, and it reminds you of everything you wanted to protect but couldn't. You start to wonder. What's left of you when the mission is over? Who are you when there's nothing left to fight? I'd walk through town and see life moving on, people rushing to work, kids arguing over candy, couples laughing like the world had never broken. And I'd think, how did I ever fit into this? The truth is, I didn't. Not at first. Coming home wasn't a return, it was a rebirth. And like any rebirth, it came with pain. There's something they don't prepare you for, the echo of your own stillness. When everything's quiet, your memories start to talk. And they don't whisper. They scream. Every night I'd sit on my porch, staring into the dark. My uniform still hung in the closet, perfectly pressed, untouched. The same boots I wore through the desert sat by the door, covered in dust that never really left. I'd stare at them and think, those boots carried a man who doesn't exist anymore. People think soldiers come home to heal. But the truth is, home is where the healing hurts the most. Because now you're surrounded by the things you fought for, and all you can think about is the ones who'll never see them again. That's the first lesson war burned into me. The silence after the storm is the loudest battle you'll ever fight. You can train your body to survive anything. But training your soul to live again, that's a different kind of war. Some nights, I'd sit in that silence and ask myself, did I do enough? Did I deserve to come back? Questions that have no answers, only echoes. It took me months to understand that the silence wasn't my enemy. It was my mirror. It forced me to see myself, not as a soldier, but as a man stripped of his armor. A man trying to find peace in a world that had forgotten how to be still. And one morning, just before dawn, I sat there with a cup of black coffee, watching the horizon turn from gray to gold. For the first time, I didn't think about the noise. I didn't think about what I'd lost. I just breathed. And in that breath, something shifted. I realized that peace doesn't shout. It whispers. It waits for you in the stillness, buried under guilt, under fear, under pain, waiting for you to finally stop running and just listen. That morning, I listened. And in that quiet, I heard their voices, not in screams or cries, but in laughter. In wind. In the faint memory of a sunrise halfway across the world. And I finally understood. The silence wasn't punishing me. It was reminding me. Reminding me that I'm still here. That I still have time. That I still have a chance to live the peace they never got to see. Because maybe the greatest way to honor the fallen is to stop falling yourself. So I made a promise that day. Not to forget. Not to drown in the noise of my memories. But to carry their lessons into the world beyond the uniform. Because war doesn't end when the shooting stops. It ends when the silence becomes something you can live inside, without breaking. And that was the beginning. The beginning of learning how to live again. The beginning of 7 lessons that would reshape everything I believed about pain, purpose, and peace. They told us war ends when you come home. They never said what comes home with you. The noise fades. The boots are hung. The uniform gets folded, but something else stays unfolded inside you, like a flag that can't rest. When I stepped off that plane, the crowd was cheering. Flags waved. Cameras flashed. And yet, it all felt distant, like the sound was reaching me through water. People smiled. Some saluted. My name echoed in voices that didn't sound real anymore. They called it homecoming. But for me, it felt like a beginning I wasn't ready for. Because behind my eyes, behind every cheer, I carried faces. Faces that didn't come back. And every step on that polished airport floor sounded like footsteps beside me that no longer existed. That's the part no one warns you about, the silence that screams louder than any battlefield. When I hugged my mother, she held me so tight I thought maybe she could press the war out of me. But war doesn't wash off with a shower or a home-cooked meal. It lingers in your heartbeat. In the way you skin a crowd. In the way sleep feels like a threat instead of rest. That night, after everyone slept, I stood by my window. Streetlights flickered outside. The world looked peaceful, but my mind still moved like a patrol unit, sweeping shadows for danger. I remember whispering to myself. Why does it feel heavier now that I'm safe? That was the weight. Not the rucksack, not the armor, but memory. The kind that doesn't fade when the mission ends. You see, war doesn't teach you how to die. It teaches you how to live with everything you've seen. And the hardest part isn't the bullets. It's remembering the laughter of the ones who didn't get to come home, and trying to find peace in the fact that you did. I thought being strong meant pretending. So I smiled when people said they were proud. I nodded when they said, "You made it." But inside, I knew, a part of me never left. There's a strange guilt that follows survival. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave the pain somewhere to go. I realized that maybe the reason I survived wasn't luck. Maybe it was purpose. Maybe the weight I carried wasn't a curse, but a message, to remember, and to remind others that love and loss can coexist, and still create something strong. People ask if I'd do it again. My answer always surprises them, yes. Because even though the war took pieces of me, it also showed me something no comfort ever could, the value of peace. You can't understand stillness until you've lived through chaos. You can't appreciate love until you've seen what hate can destroy. And you can't truly live until you've learned to make peace with your ghosts. That's the weight that followed me home. Not a burden to break me, but a reminder to carry carefully. Because when I finally learned to set it down, I realized I wasn't losing my brothers. I was honoring them. And maybe that's what homecoming really is. Not the parade, not the cheers, but the quiet moment when you realize your story didn't end there. It's still being written, every morning you wake up and choose to remember, to live, to love again. Some weights aren't meant to be dropped. They're meant to shape you, until carrying them no longer hurts, but humbles you. That's when the war truly ends, not when the guns go silent, but when your heart learns how to. They say silence is peaceful. But for soldiers, silence is rarely kind. When you've lived months listening for footsteps in the dark, for the metallic click of danger, for the pulse of chaos, silence doesn't bring rest. It brings memory. And memory doesn't whisper, it roars. When I came home, silence filled every room like smoke. The ticking of a clock sounded too loud. The hum of the refrigerator was the kind of noise you notice only when the world stops spinning. And every heartbeat, my own, felt foreign. Like it didn't belong in a place this still. That's the thing no one talks about, you leave the war, but it doesn't leave you. It lingers in the silence between heartbeats, reminding you that peace isn't quiet, it's learning how to live inside the quiet. The first night I spent alone after coming home, I woke to the sound of my own breathing, sharp, heavy, unfamiliar. For a second, I thought it was someone else's. My hand went instinctively for a weapon that wasn't there. And then it hit me, the silence wasn't a threat. It was absence. No radio chatter. No gravel crunching under boots. No whispered commands in the dark. Just me, and a world that had moved on. But how do you move on when your body still reacts to ghosts? When your heartbeat still races at the sound of a door creak? When you wake up sweating not from fear, but from the habit of surviving? That's when I realized, silence doesn't just test your ears. It tests your soul. For a long time, I tried to fill it. Music. TV. Voices. Noise was easier than memory. But one night, my power went out during a storm. Everything went dark and still, just thunder far away. And for the first time, I didn't reach for a distraction. I just sat there. The rain hit the window. The wind moved the trees. The world outside was alive in its own rhythm. And slowly, I matched my breathing to it. Inhale. Exhale. Like syncing with something I'd forgotten, the pulse of life itself. That night, the silence didn't scare me. It held me. It whispered something no battlefield ever could. You're still here. That's the moment I started understanding the real weight of peace. Peace isn't the absence of noise, it's the courage to listen to what's left when the noise is gone. So I began walking again. Not marching, walking. Through the woods near my home. Along empty streets at dawn. The sound of gravel under my boots was different now, softer, gentler. But it still echoed something inside me, like an old rhythm learning a new song. And sometimes, in that silence, I'd hear their voices, not in grief, but in gratitude. Keep moving, brother. Breathe. You made it. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks. Or maybe, it was memory learning to comfort instead of haunt. People talk about healing like it's a single moment. But it's not. Healing is the space between heartbeats, the slow realization that time is moving, even when you're standing still. There was a morning when I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, and the sunrise looked different. Not because it was brighter, but because I was finally looking at it. For so long, I'd been trapped replaying what I'd lost. That day, I started noticing what was still here. The world hadn't forgotten me, I had just forgotten how to let it in. Sometimes I still get lost in silence. Certain sounds, a slammed door, a burst of static, even the rhythm of a helicopter far away, can pull me back in time. But now, I breathe through it. Because silence isn't my enemy anymore. It's the space where I meet myself again. The space where I talk to the version of me who survived and say, it's okay now. You did enough. That's what most people don't understand. Coming home isn't about being done with the war. It's about learning to live after it. And that means forgiving yourself for surviving. There was one moment, a small, almost invisible one, that changed everything for me. My niece was drawing at the table one afternoon. She looked up and said, "Uncle, why do you always sit so still?" I didn't know how to answer. Then she smiled, handed me a crayon, and said, "Color with me." So I did. And in that simple act, filling blank paper with color, I realized that's what healing is. You can't erase the lines that are already there. You can only color around them. That day, silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like space to rebuild, to remember, to love again. Every soldier I know carries a version of that silence. Some try to drown it out. Some try to outrun it. But the truth is, you have to listen to it. Because inside that silence lives every reason you fought in the first place. Peace. Family. Freedom. Love. It's not something you win once. It's something you learn to hold, heartbeat by heartbeat. Now, when I stand in the quiet, I don't flinch. I breathe. Because I know what that stillness cost. And when I hear my own heart beating, slow, steady, human, I think of all the hearts that stopped so mine could keep going. And in that rhythm, I hear them still. Not as ghosts, but as reminders. That's the silence between heartbeats, the sound of life choosing to go on. There are some words that never leave your lips. Not because you don't want to say them. But because you don't know how. I used to write letters I never mailed. Each one started the same way. "Hey, Mom. I'm okay." But okay was a word that did too much heavy lifting. Okay meant I hadn't been shot at today. Okay meant I'd slept for an hour. Okay meant I could still tell the difference between fireworks and mortars, at least, I thought I could. Those letters were never meant for anyone's eyes but mine. They were my way of bleeding quietly. Of putting pain somewhere safe, on paper. Where it couldn't explode inside me. Some soldiers carried photos. Some carried lucky charms. I carried words. They lived folded in my pocket. Creased and sweat-stained. Written in the dark with a flashlight. When the night felt too long and the stars too far away. They weren't reports or confessions. They were reminders. That there was a world worth returning to. There was one letter I rewrote a dozen times. To the one I left waiting. I never wrote her name, because somehow it made it harder. If I kept it nameless, maybe it hurt less. I wrote about sunsets that looked like fire and dust. About laughter that sounded like home, even in a war zone. And about how I was scared, not of dying, but of being forgotten by the time I came back. Then I'd fold it up. Press it flat. And tuck it deep into my vest pocket. Right over my heart. As if words could protect me. Years later, I found that same letter while unpacking old things. The paper had faded. The ink had bled. But the feeling, the ache between every line, was still alive. I never sent it. And maybe that's how it was meant to be. Because some letters aren't written to be read. They're written to release. To take the chaos inside you. And give it a shape. A rhythm. A voice. Even if no one else ever hears it. There's something sacred about unspoken words. They carry a weight that time can't erase. They carry a weight that time can't erase. Every, I miss you, every, I wish I'd said this. Hangs in the air somewhere. Like invisible prayers that never reached heaven. But still changed the person who whispered them. That's what those letters were for me. A bridge between the soldier I was. And the human I was trying to remember. I started writing again after I came home. Not to anyone specific. Just, to the ghosts. Dear brothers, I'd write. Do you remember the sound of laughter before dawn? Do you remember how coffee tasted in the desert? Do you remember how we promised to live better, if we made it back? Every letter began with memory. And ended with forgiveness. Forgiveness for surviving. Forgiveness for forgetting, even for a moment. How lucky we were to still wake up. One night, I took all those letters. The ones from then. And the ones from now. And I burned them. Not in anger. Not in grief. But in release. The paper curled and turned to ash. But the words. They didn't die. They rose. Like smoke. Like prayer. Like something finding its way back to where it belonged. I realized then. I'd spent years trying to hold on to pain. Thinking that letting go would mean forgetting. But letting go isn't forgetting. It's allowing space for peace to grow. That night, as the last flame faded, I looked at my hands. Hands that once held weapons. Now holding nothing but warmth. And I understood something simple. Something I'd missed for years. The letters I never sent. They were never really for them. They were for me. Every word I wrote in the dark was my way of saying, I'm still here. I still feel. I still believe there's something beautiful left in this world. Sometimes I think about writing one more letter. To the man I used to be. I'd tell him. You did what you had to do. You carried what others couldn't. You kept your promise, you came home. And then, maybe, I'd sign it simply. Thank you. Because that's the hardest thing for a soldier to say. Not to the world. But to himself. If you're watching this right now. And you've got your own letters you never sent. The things you wish you'd said. The words that still live heavy in your chest. Write them. Even if no one ever reads them. Even if they sit in a drawer forever. Because some healing doesn't come from being heard. It comes from speaking anyway. There's a quiet kind of strength in putting your heart into ink. In giving shape to the things that haunt you. That's not weakness. That's courage. So maybe tonight, before you sleep, you'll write your own letter too. And maybe it'll start the same way mine always did. Hey. I'm okay. Only this time. Maybe you'll mean it. Because that's the hardest thing for a soldier to say. Not to the world. But to himself. If you're watching this right now, and you've got your own letters you never sent, the things you wish you'd said, the words that still live heavy in your chest, write them. Even if no one ever reads them. Even if they sit in a drawer forever. Because some healing doesn't come from being heard. It comes from speaking anyway. There's a quiet kind of strength in putting your heart into ink. In giving shape to the things that haunt you. That's not weakness. That's courage. So maybe tonight, before you sleep, you'll write your own letter too. And maybe it'll start the same way mine always did. Hey. I'm okay. Only this time. Maybe you'll mean it. One of the younger guys, barely 20, pulled out a tiny flag from his pack. He said his mother gave it to him before he left. Keep this close, she told him, and remember why you fight. He planted it in the mud beside him that night. It didn't wave, it just stood there. Soaked, heavy, almost falling apart. But somehow, it still stood. That's what we learned out there. That sometimes standing is enough. Even when the world tries to knock you down. When I came home, I couldn't look at the flag for a while. Every time I saw one, I saw their faces. Miller. Torres. Evans. The ones who kept their promise. In the only way they could. For a long time, I felt guilty for surviving. As if living was breaking some unspoken pact. But then I realized. The promise beneath the flag isn't just about dying for something. It's about living for it. Living with purpose. Living with gratitude. Living in a way that honors those who can't. So I started small. Every morning, I'd fold my own flag. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. It became a ritual. A conversation between me and the ghosts. I remember, I'd whisper. And somehow, the world felt lighter. Each fold reminded me. Their stories didn't end on the battlefield. They lived through every breath I took. Every sunrise I watched. Every moment I refused to waste. That's the thing about promises. You can't always keep them the way you want to. But you can keep their meaning alive. You can love harder. Forgive quicker. Hold tighter. Smile wider. Because that's what they would have done. If they'd been given one more day. There's something I tell myself every time I see the flag now. You didn't survive by accident. You survived for a reason. Maybe that reason is this moment. Telling you this story. Reminding you that behind every symbol. Every ceremony. There's something deeply human. A promise. A bond. A truth that no bullet could destroy. So, to the ones who never made it home. We kept our promise. We told your story. We remembered your laughter. We carried your lessons. And to the ones still fighting their invisible wars at home. You're not alone. The flag doesn't just stand for the fallen. It stands for the ones still standing. That's the real promise beneath it. And if you're watching this right now, feeling like your battles don't matter, or your pain doesn't count, remember this. The flag you see on that porch, the one rippling softly in the evening light, it's waving for you too. Because freedom isn't just a gift we receive. It's a promise we renew. Every single day we decide to keep going. Every soldier leaves a part of themselves beneath that flag. But the part that comes home, that's the part that keeps the promise alive. And maybe that's all any of us can really do. Keep the promise. To remember. To honor. To live. There are battles no one sees. Wars that don't make the news. Because they happen in silence, inside your own mind. That's what they don't tell you when you come home. That not all enemies carry guns. Some wear your face. Some whisper your name when you try to sleep. And one night, mine finally caught up to me. It started like any other night. The hum of the ceiling fan. The faint sound of traffic outside. The familiar ache in my chest that I kept pretending wasn't there. But then, the quiet turned loud. The darkness felt heavier. And suddenly, I forgot how to breathe. My chest locked. My heart raced. I wasn't in my room anymore. I was back there, in the dust, in the noise, in the panic. Every sound, every flash, every scream I thought I'd buried came back to life like a storm I couldn't run from. I tried to stand, but my legs gave out. The air refused to come. My hands shook as if they were holding a weapon again. I could hear Miller's voice. Not like a memory, but like he was right there, shouting my name. Get down. That's when it hit me. The war wasn't over. Not for me. When you're out there, you live minute by minute. You learn to survive chaos. But when you come home, you have to survive silence. And that's harder than anything. Because silence doesn't end. It echoes. It crawls into your thoughts, reminding you of every sound you'll never hear again. That night, I sat on the floor, gasping, trembling, trying to convince myself I was safe. But safety felt foreign. Like a word I'd forgotten the meaning of. I'd been trained to fight, to react, to endure. But no one trains you how to live again. That's the part no one prepares you for. How to face peace when your soul still expects war. When I finally caught my breath, I just sat there. Sweat soaking my shirt. Heart pounding. Tears I didn't know I had, burning down my face. And in that moment, something broke. But not in a bad way. It was like a dam giving way. Years of pressure finally releasing. I realized I couldn't keep pretending. Couldn't keep wearing the uniform of I'm fine. Because I wasn't. The next morning, I did something harder than anything I'd done in combat. I called for help. Not because I was weak. Because I was done hiding. They call it PTSD. But those 4 letters can't hold what it really is. It's 1,000 invisible wounds that never stop bleeding. It's the sound of fireworks that feel like artillery. It's walking through crowds and scanning exits without realizing it. It's smiling in photos while your soul trembles underneath. But that morning, I made a choice. Not to let the past define me. Recovery isn't cinematic. It's slow. Ugly. Uneven. Some days you feel human again. Others, you fall apart for no reason. I started therapy. Sat in rooms with strangers who felt like brothers. Men who carried their ghosts the same way I carried mine. Quietly, respectfully, always aware they were there. We didn't talk much about war. We talked about breathing. About sleep. About forgiveness, especially the kind you give yourself. And for the first time, I realized healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning how to live with memory. Without letting it destroy you. One night, my therapist asked me, "What's the first thing you do when you wake up?" I said, "I check the time." He smiled. "Try checking your pulse instead. Remind yourself you made it to another day." It sounded simple, almost silly. But I did it. Every morning, I put my fingers to my wrist. Feel the heartbeat. And whisper, "Still here." That phrase became my anchor. Still here. 3 syllables that rebuilt me, one morning at a time. Months passed. The flashbacks softened. The nightmares came less often. But they never disappeared completely. And maybe they never will. That's okay. Because peace isn't the absence of war. It's learning how to walk beside it without letting it pull you under. I started walking at sunrise. No headphones. No noise. Just me, the morning air. And the quiet hum of a world that had somehow kept spinning while I stood still. Each step became a prayer. Each breath, a victory. Somewhere between those quiet mornings and the long nights, I found something I didn't know I'd lost. Myself. Not the soldier. Not the survivor. Just the man. And that man wasn't defined by what broke him, but by what he chose to rebuild. I don't tell you this for pity. I tell you this because somewhere, someone watching this might be fighting the same silent war tonight. And if that's you, listen carefully. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're healing. And healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just whispers. Keep breathing. If this story reached you, if even one line felt like something you've lived through, then share it. Not for me, but for the one who needs to know they're not alone tonight. Because maybe that's what survival really means. Not just staying alive, but helping someone else remember how to breathe again. They say a soldier never stops running, even when the war ends. Not from enemies anymore, but from echoes. From memories. From himself. For years, I was one of them. I didn't run for survival. I ran from reflection. Every time I looked in the mirror, I didn't see me, I saw everyone I couldn't save. And that's the cruelest part of coming home. You survive the battlefield, but the guilt survives with you. It's strange how ordinary moments can break you. The smell of rain after a long dry day. A song on the radio that used to play in the barracks. The sight of an empty chair at a family dinner. They don't announce their arrival. They just appear, like ghosts that still remember your name. For the longest time, I thought the answer was to stay busy. To fill the silence with work, noise, movement, anything. Because when I stopped, the memories caught up. But there comes a day when your body refuses to run anymore. Mine came on a cold morning, years after the uniform was folded away. I was jogging by the lake. Not for fitness, but to exhaust myself enough to fall asleep later. The mist hung low. The kind of quiet that used to comfort me now felt like judgment. Every step pounded like a heartbeat. Every breath scraped like gravel in my lungs. And then, I stopped. Not because I wanted to, but because I suddenly couldn't. I bent over, hands on knees, gasping. And in that stillness, surrounded by nothing but water and wind, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Grief. It came like a wave. Not just for the friends I lost, but for the men I used to be. The one who laughed easily. The one who dreamed without fear. The one who thought love was stronger than distance. That version of me had died quietly. Not on the battlefield, but somewhere between one deployment and another. When I decided that feeling was weakness. That moment broke something open. It was like I'd been holding my breath for years. And finally exhaled. I realized then. You can't heal by outrunning your pain. You heal when you stop and face it. I started doing something small after that morning, journaling. Not writing about war or loss, but about moments I'd forgotten to appreciate. The smell of coffee. The way the sun hit the kitchen window. The laughter of my niece when she ran to hug me. Tiny things. Human things. The kind that war can't take away. No matter how hard it tries. Over time, I stopped writing about pain. And started writing about purpose. Because pain, when ignored, consumes you. But when faced, when understood, it transforms into meaning. That's when I began speaking at schools. Sharing my story not as a hero, but as a human who had broken and rebuilt. At first, it terrified me. To stand there and tell a crowd of strangers that I'd once been afraid to live. But the first time I saw a young man in the front row nod through tears, I realized something. Sometimes, your healing begins when you help someone else start theirs. One day, after a talk, a student came up to me. He was quiet, trembling slightly, holding a folded note in his hand. He said, "Sir, I was going to end my life tonight. But your story made me think, maybe I can fight one more day." He handed me the note. And in that moment, I didn't feel like a soldier or a survivor. I felt like a bridge between despair and hope. I hugged him. And for the first time, I understood the meaning of service after service. We fight wars overseas. But the real mission, the one that matters most, is the fight to remind people that life is still worth living. Since that day, I stopped running. Not because I conquered my past, but because I made peace with it. Now, when I walk by that same lake, I still feel the ghosts. But they walk beside me, not behind me. They're not chains anymore. They're reminders. Of love, loyalty, and sacrifice. Of the men who taught me how to live with courage, even in pain. Every scar has a story. Every story carries a lesson. And mine taught me this. You don't need to erase your past to heal. You just need to forgive the version of you that did what he had to do to survive. Because that man, the one who carried pain, guilt, and silence, he's not your weakness. He's the reason you're still here. If you're watching this right now, and there's a part of you still running, stop. Not because you're done fighting, but because you've earned the right to rest. Look at yourself, not as broken, but as rebuilt. Wiser. Stronger. More human. And if you found even a flicker of peace in this story, don't keep it. Share it. Because peace, like courage, grows when passed on. There's something sacred about a uniform. It's more than fabric, it's identity, pride, armor. When I wore it, I felt untouchable. Not because I believed I was invincible, but because it gave me something to hide behind. The truth is, the uniform protected me from bullets. But not from memories. From storms, but not from silence. From enemies, but not from myself. And that's the part nobody tells you. When you take the uniform off, the war doesn't end. It just changes shape. I remember the day I folded it for the last time. The creases were sharp. The metals gleamed under the dull light of my small apartment. I thought it would feel like freedom. Instead, it felt like I'd buried a part of myself. Every stitch in that fabric held years of my life. Brothers lost, nights awake, letters unread. And moments that never made it into any photograph. When you're a soldier, you don't just wear the uniform. You become it. And when it's gone, you start to wonder who's left underneath. In the beginning, I avoided mirrors. I didn't recognize the men staring back. No rank, no mission, no orders, just a silence that stretched for miles. I used to wake up at dawn out of habit. Still expecting the whistle, the command, the urgency. But the world outside didn't need a soldier. It needed a man. And that man had forgotten how to live without purpose. I tried filling the gap. Work, noise, meaningless distractions. But nothing felt right. Because none of it needed me the way the war once did. One evening, I went to the local grocery store. Simple task. But when I saw a kid running down the aisle in a camo hoodie, my chest tightened. Not because of fear, but because of something deeper. Nostalgia, pride, and loss. His father followed behind. Laughing, calling out. Slow down, soldier. And for a second, I felt something crack inside me. That word, soldier. Once my whole identity. Now just a memory belonging to someone else. I walked out of the store with nothing in my hands. Because the thing I needed couldn't be bought. A sense of belonging. That night, I found my uniform again. It was still folded in the same box I'd left it in. When I opened it, the scent hit me. A mix of dust, old leather, and time. My hands trembled as I lifted the jacket. I ran my fingers over the patches. The flag, the name, the unit. Each one told a story. Each one whispered a question I'd avoided for years. Who are you without us? I sat there for hours. Not crying, not angry. Just lost. Because the uniform had been both shield and cage. It protected me from pain. But it also kept me from feeling alive. Days later, I was invited to a veterans event. I almost didn't go. But something, maybe guilt, maybe curiosity, pushed me there. When I arrived, I saw men and women just like me. Different faces, same eyes. Eyes that had seen too much and said too little. One of them, an older Marine, noticed me sitting alone. He walked over, extended his hand, and said, "You know, son, the hardest mission is learning to be human again." That line hit me like a bullet. Learning to be human again. He said it so casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. But for me, it was everything I'd been avoiding. After that day, I started letting my guard down. Bit by bit. I reached out to people I'd lost touch with. I talked to my sister for the first time in months. I even went to therapy, something I'd once thought was for other people. And slowly, I began to realize. Strength doesn't mean silence. Courage isn't never breaking. It's letting yourself feel everything you've been holding back. The uniform taught me discipline. But life after it taught me vulnerability. And that's a different kind of bravery. One afternoon, I found myself volunteering at a local school. Helping kids of deployed soldiers write letters to their parents overseas. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, looked up at me and asked, "Did you ever get scared when you were a soldier?" I paused. My instinct was to say no. But I didn't. I knelt down, looked her in the eyes, and said, "Yes. All the time." But I was never alone. Her smile was small, but real. And in that moment, I realized something profound. She didn't need a hero. She needed honesty. Someone to tell her that fear doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. That night, I unfolded the uniform one last time. Not to wear it. But to hang it up, properly, proudly. Not as something that defined me. But as something that shaped me. I didn't need it to feel strong anymore. Because strength had taken a new form. Quiet, patient, compassionate. The uniform once protected my body. Now, I protect something else. The peace I fought so hard to find. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. The uniform can't protect you from what's inside. Only truth can. Only forgiveness can. Only love can. So if you're listening, and you've ever felt like you lost yourself in the fight to be strong, know this. You are not what you wear, what you've done, or where you've been. You are who you choose to become after the noise fades. And that's a battle worth winning. There's a kind of promise you make in war that feels heavier than any weapon you'll ever hold. It isn't written down. It isn't ordered. It's spoken in quiet moments, whispered between brothers under skies too full of fire to dream under. And the cruel thing about those promises is that not all of them can be kept. I still remember his face. Jensen. He was 21, full of laughter that didn't belong in a place like that. He used to hum old country songs when we cleaned our rifles. His voice steady, calm, as if the world couldn't touch him. One night, as the rain hammered down on the canvas above us, he looked at me and said, "If something happens to me, promise me you'll tell my mom I wasn't scared." It sounded simple. Too simple. But there's nothing simple about last words. So I nodded. I said, "I promise." And I meant it. Weeks later, during a patrol in the valley, we were ambushed. The sound still lives in me. The metallic thunder of chaos, the shouting, the flash of dirt and flame. I remember dragging Jensen behind the wall. Blood on my hands that wasn't mine. He looked up at me, lips trembling but still smiling that same ridiculous smile. And before I could say anything, he was gone. I called for a medic. I screamed his name until my throat tore. But the silence that followed was absolute. When I came home, that promise followed me. Like a shadow that never left, even in daylight. I tried writing to his mother dozens of times. Each letter started the same. "Ma'am, I served with your son." But I never finished. Because how do you tell a mother that her boy died with fear in his eyes? How do you write truth when all she deserves is peace? So I stayed silent. 4 years. That silence ate away at me. It bled into every part of my life, my sleep, my laughter, my faith. Every time I saw a mother hug her son, I felt that same invisible hand tightening around my throat. They tell you coming home is the easy part. That once the war ends, you just walk off the plane, into the arms of your family. And life picks up where it left off. But the truth? You don't really come home all at once. You return in pieces, a smile here, a laugh there. Slowly stitching yourself back together while pretending you were never torn apart. The day I finally came home wasn't marked by a flight. Or a ceremony. Or the sound of a crowd cheering. It happened quietly, years later. On a morning that looked like every other. The world outside my window was painted gold by sunrise. The coffee smelled like it used to. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't wake up reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. That's when I realized the war inside me had gone silent. For years, I'd been chasing peace like it was something waiting for me at the end of a road. But peace doesn't wait for you. It doesn't come from medals, or apologies, or even forgiveness. It comes from acceptance, from finally looking at your own reflection and saying, yes, I made it. But I am not the same. I remember walking outside that morning, barefoot. The grass still wet with dew. The air was sharp and alive. And somewhere nearby, a child laughed. That small, careless sound that used to break me apart. But that day, it didn't hurt. It healed. Because I realized that sound, that innocence, was what we'd all fought for. Not victory. Not glory. Just that one pure sound of life continuing. I went to visit my mother later that day. She was older now, her hands slower, her voice softer. But her eyes still had that same look of quiet strength that used to hold me steady when everything else fell apart. She poured me tea. And for the first time, I told her everything. Not the filtered version I'd been giving for years. The real story. The nights I couldn't sleep. The faces I still saw. The guilt that lived under my skin. She didn't interrupt. She didn't cry. She just listened. Like she'd been waiting for that moment all along. And when I was done, she reached across the table, took my hand, and said something I'll never forget. You don't have to be a soldier anymore. Those words broke me. Because I didn't realize until then that I'd still been fighting. Not against anyone else, but against myself. Against the version of me that thought he wasn't allowed to feel peace again. In that moment, I understood something every soldier eventually learns. That coming home isn't about returning to a place. It's about returning to yourself. And sometimes, that's the hardest battle of all. That night, I went back to my old room. The same walls, the same photographs. The same quiet hum of a world that had moved on without me. I stood there looking at a picture of me in my unit. All of us young, laughing. Not knowing how much those moments would come to define us. I whispered each of their names under my breath. Not as ghosts, but as brothers who taught me what it meant to live with courage. And for the first time, I didn't feel haunted. I felt grateful. Later, as the sun set, I walked out to the porch. The sky was bleeding orange and gold. And in the distance, I could hear church bells echoing faintly through the hills. That sound, gentle, distant, familiar, felt like a heartbeat. Not mine. Not anyone's in particular. Just life itself. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, I'm home. Not because I'd arrived somewhere new, but because I'd finally stopped running from where I'd been. The next morning, I started writing. Not about war. About peace. About the lessons carved into me by pain and loss and love. And that's when I realized what my purpose had become. To share these stories. To help others find their way back from the silence. Because there are so many out there. Still fighting invisible wars in the quiet corners of their minds. Men and women who look fine on the outside. But inside, they're still in that desert. Still hearing the echoes of things they can't forget. I wanted them to know they weren't alone. If you're one of them. If you've carried your own war home inside your chest. Hear me when I say this. You are not broken. You are forged. Every scar you carry is proof that you faced something most people never will. And still had the courage to wake up the next morning. You don't need to bury the past. You just need to learn how to live beside it. Because peace isn't the absence of what hurt you. It's the decision to stop letting it control you. So, here's my final lesson. The one the war taught me that no book ever could. We spend so much of our lives waiting to be ready to move on. But healing doesn't wait for permission. It starts the moment you decide to let yourself feel again. That's the day you truly come home. And if you're watching this right now, if this story touched you, don't keep it to yourself. Someone you know is still fighting a battle you can't see. Share this with them. Remind them they're not alone. Because sometimes, one story is all it takes. to bring someone home. Speech balloon. This was the day I finally came home. A soldier's journey through pain, silence, and redemption. And the quiet truth that peace is not found. It's built. If this story moved you, hit that red heart like. Drop a comment about what home means to you. And subscribe for more cinematic stories of courage, love, and the quiet strength of the human spirit.